Hi everyone, and welcome back to Train Simulator. This time we're back on Kent, but instead of taking a Class 700, we're taking a Class 465 along the Medway Valley Line, of course starting at Strood, and there's a Class 395. This is a scenario that I've made for Steam Workshop, and I'll be putting a link to it in the description, so you can download it for yourself, provided that whereas for me completing this run, it's entirely dependent on the bloody frame rate and how much, or rather how little, I can tolerate it. Anyway, this is the Hitachi powered Class 465-1. 465-0, and obligatory lag just then. It appears that going through the hassle of having to restart the computer has done absolutely nothing to improve the frame rates. Big surprise. I really am sick of it. Anyway, so if I have any more patience left, we should be able to get this thing going. This is, of course, the 465 from one of Armstrong Powerhouse's enhancement packs. And when this thing gets moving, you'll be able to hear the sounds of the Hitachi motors, which are an awful lot better than as they were before. Because the default 465 with the Chatham mainline was terrible from memory. Like, the modelling wasn't all that good, and the guard operated, yep. And the motor sounds were so quiet you could barely hear them. It's not the case on this AP version, of course. Right, so of course as we leave Strood, we go past the junction where the line, or the spur line up towards the bridge across the River Medway diverges, and then this bridge here takes the line from Rochester, the Chatham main line off of Rochester and up towards Sol Street and eventually Bromley South and London Victoria. I should add that even though I've put a Class 465 in for this scenario, it is somewhat historic, semi-inaccurate, because in real life the Medway Valley services are primarily run with Class 375 Electrostars, specifically the 3-car variant, and sometimes they use 466s on the line, which are 2-car networkers, but I don't know of that many occasions where in real life a 465 has run on this service. But what I do know is that the Medway Valley Line is quite a picturesque route, which is not often to see that for a third rail line. As we'll see later, the scenery does get nicer. Like, mainly once we get past Cuxton, I think. And I think between here and Cuxton we actually go under an overbridge that's actually part of High Speed 1. I don't remember what that bridge is called, if it even has a name, but I know that I seem to recall it's right next to a great big road bridge. In fact, I can just about make it out there in the distance. Yes, I've had to do several attempts to get this game running okay, because the previous, I think, 2 attempts, I got this strange issue where every 30 odd seconds it would jutter down, it would lag and get as bad as like 6 or 7 frames a second, and that was so inconsistent that it just drove me up the wall, as it were. And there's that HS1 bridge. Although not all the scenery for it is loaded in properly, as far as I can... Oh no, it seems to be fine. I'll tell you what this bit reminds me of, where we go under this... Oh crap, I'm going way too fast. I was about to say, I'll tell you what this bit here where we go under a huge bridge reminds me of. There's that stupid lag I was on about. It's when you're driving on the route from Plymouth to Gunnislake in a Class 150, and after you leave St Bordeaux Victoria Road, you then go under on the single track line. You then go underneath the eastern end of the Royal Albert Bridge, and yeah, that really does remind me of that. Or taking the 465 under that bridge really does remind me of driving from Plymouth to Gunnislake. I might actually do that again at some point, possibly as another gameplay video. Or of course you can, feel free to let me know what you think of that idea in the comments. Of course, I'm not sure if I actually will take a Class 150 for a spin again, because I've got a lot of other stuff to get on with. The brakes on this train aren't too bad. I suppose that's pretty important, since the 465s are normally used on commuter service out of South London. Well, out of London, Victoria, Waterloo East, which is actually not a terminus station, but there you go. And also Cannon Street and Charing Cross. And yeah, considering those sorts of services, you would want a train to have good acceleration and braking. Although, as far as I know, with when you've got an electric train running on direct current, as it is here, from what I understand, that significantly impacts how quickly they can accelerate, because I don't think they can draw as much power from the system as they can if they're running on AC. Look at the doors. That's right, I did, just before we left Strood, I set this to being guard operated. Because, whilst I don't know too much about how they run the service, how Southeastern run services on the Medway Valley Line, I do know that they do have a guard on board, or at least they did. But and I'm pretty sure that for suburban service in South London they wouldn't be guard operated. I don't know about you, but I really do like these motor sounds, and I think Armstrong Powerhouse did quite a good job on them, as they usually do with their sounds. If anything, that's one of the many things they're known for. Actually, come to think of it, it's one of the many things they're praised for. Right, so I remember initially I set the weather on this thing to like overcast, to cloudy or something. That initially fixed the frame rate, but well, no, it didn't. But then I tried setting the weather to overcast in summer, and that seems to have helped increase the frame rate rather. Okay, those look like great big power pylons in the distance. Or, as G Loves Trains would call them, Blackpool Towers. Right, so next station is one that I'm not entirely sure on in terms of pronunciation. Like, is it Halling or Halling? If someone who's more familiar with the Medway Valley Line was watching, they'd probably... Well, you're certainly more than welcome to let me know how you're supposed to pronounce it, because I don't know whether, as I said, I don't know whether it's Halling or Halling. I suppose if there was an E there instead of an A, it certainly would be Halling. I forgot about these disused sidings. And from memory, although this route is definitely set in the modern day, it's not like the 2020s. So I think it was brought out in like 2019 or 2020. But no, it wasn't 2020. But I do remember that it was originally released as an extended... Dovetail released an extended version of the Chatham Main Line London to Gillingham route, where you also got the Medway Valley Line. But if you bought that route, it wouldn't overwrite the default Chatham Main Line. So if you didn't have the CML before you got the Medway Valley extension, you would get both the original and the extended version. So yeah, I'm not sure how to feel about that. It just seems rather dodgy on Dovetail's part. Anyway, this is that station whose pronunciation I was got confused with. Now, from memory, the next station is either Aylesford or Snodland. Or, no, it's Newhythe, I think. Yeah, the station detail I've noticed on a lot of these dovetail routes, it's okay, but it's nothing absolutely phenomenal. Generally they don't, well, obviously they can't put in like any advertising because it's, well, obviously because of all the licensing restrictions and that sort of thing. And but even so, it's like for the most part they still look fine. You see, Dovetail, it is possible to script the doors so that they open and shut at a realistic speed. If anyone remembers the default class 323 and the London Overground 172 for that matter. I could probably go off listing examples all day, but I think I'll just stick with the 323 and 172. Incidentally, I can't remember the last time I drove the class 172. And I wouldn't mind seeing like a proper pack based on the 172s, like to like an Armstrong Powerhouse level of quality, if you will, or like the Master Key Simulations class 460. Apparently, I've heard a lot of good things about that 460, but I still haven't got it, and I can't really justify getting it myself because there's not really a lot I feel I can do with that unit besides Victoria to Brighton. Only stopping at Gatwick, you know that kind of thing. So with the 172 pack, if any developers were ever going to make that, I would want it to include all four subclasses, so the stroke 0 to stroke 3. So the stroke 0 version that would be done in London Overground and I think West Midlands Railway colours. Because after the Gospel Oak to Barking line was electrified, the 172-0s were transferred to the West Midlands. And I think Jeff Marshall rode on one of those refurbished, or those ex-Overground 172s when he did one of his request stop videos. And you would also get the 172-1, which I believe is only on Chiltern Railways. And that one, like the stroke 0, doesn't have a corridor connection between or the cab ends, like the 465 here. And I realise I'm going a bit too slowly but on the approach to Snodland, but I'd rather go too slowly than too fast to stop in time. Anyway, so the other thing with the 172s is that the first two variants of them, oh by the way there's a class 375 going back to Strood. So the stroke 0 and stroke 1 are quite interesting because they don't have the gangways on the cab ends like that 375. So what I mean is that if you coupled like two or more units together, you wouldn't be able to walk between the units, whereas as the design of the 375 indicates, that is a feature that these units have, and most of the Electrostars for that matter. So the earlier 172s, to me, they look an awful lot like the 168-1 and 2, and the 170s, of course. Right, so that was Snodland. Next stop is Newhythe. I think after that it's Aylesford and Maidstone West. Actually, let's have a look. So remaining stops are Newhythe, Aylesford, Maidstone Barracks, Maidstone West, East Farley as opposed to Chris Farley, Wateringbury, Yelding, Beltring, and Paddock Wood. So so back to the thing with the class 172s. I've already said what the I apologise for that awkward silence, but I just saw a terrifyingly large spider crawling up my wall. dare mess with that thing right now. Not sure how they even got here. And as I was saying, the two later versions of the 172s, the Stroke 2 and Stroke 3, they're very unusual to me because they, while they're diesels, they look like, they pretty much have the body shell of an Electrostar. So they look, in other words, they look an awful lot like a Class 377 or any other standard Electrostars. The other notable aspect of the Class 172s is that they're actually diesel mechanical units, although of course they have automatic transmission, and that means they've got quite a distinctive sound when they're accelerating, because you can clearly hear, because on those units you can clearly hear the sound of the engines revving down and then revving up again as they change gear. Sort of like the class, or the much older Class 101 like diesel multiple units, except whilst those obviously were diesel mechanical, they had manual transmission. And I've driven the Class 101 in Train Sim World enough times to know that it's definitely not the most efficient way of driving a train, or design of a train, I should say. Because when I'm driving the 101, like on the Tees Valley Line or Northern Transpennine, I don't like having to cut the power, or to bring the throttle back to idle, change gear, and then go up and then open the throttle again, and having to do that like 3 or 4, I think 3 times at least, to get up to like 70 miles an hour. The 465s, on the other hand, these things can easily hit 70 miles an hour, especially since their top speed is 75. That's the other thing I've noticed about a lot of these units that primarily do commuter runs, is that they're not as fast as the likes of the 375 that we saw just then back at Snodland. Also, I just noticed there's a problem there with some of the supports on that conveyor belt. I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be further apart. And yeah, generally, I mean, even though these units, like the 465, I think the 378, and those 376 as well, whilst those units can get up to 75 miles an hour, I don't know how often they're actually able to reach that speed. Because if you think of the commuter run in South London, like say, I think we'll just go with London Victoria to Orpington, that route is quite slow going because of how many station stops there are, and they're so close together that you can't really get up to 75 miles an hour and still slow down to stop at the next station in time. As we're pulling into this station here at Aylesford, I'd forgotten how nice it was. I'll tell you which station it reminds me of: Queenborough, which is on the branch line from Sittingbourne to Sheerness-on-Sea. Except in that case, that station doesn't have staggered platforms. And I think there's at least 2 more stations on this line that have staggered platforms, but they're both past Maidstone West. Of course, given that this service is operated with a guard, I think we have to open the doors, but the guard I think when you're running with a guard, it's only the guard that can close the doors, or at least that's how it's scripted. Because if you're doing driver-only operation, you do, of course, the driver is of course responsible for closing the doors as well. And yeah, I think that's not the door interlock lights. Hello, there's another 395. I actually forgot about this, and I'd forgotten that I'd set this to be an evening peak scenario. Because in real life, Southeastern occasionally run like peak time services from St Pancras down to Maidstone West using the 395s, and so I decided to choose this particular service to get that opportunity to pass the 395 on in the Medway Valley. So what was I saying? What was I saying before the 395 turned up? It's honestly difficult to remember. Something to do with the service to Orpington. I find this happening quite often. Well, not necessarily quite often, but it does happen every now and then. I'm saying something and then I'll either get distracted or I'll randomly pause for a long time and then I'll end up completely forgetting what I was saying. Right, but what I will say is that I'm rather enjoying this run so far. So that even though I have driven the Medway Valley route a few times before, but that's usually just been in the 375. So it's quite good to do something a little bit different, even though it's not entirely realistic. One of the other reasons why I used the 465 for this scenario is because I wanted this to be my first run with one of the APs, or like a 465 from an AP Enhancement Pack, and I didn't really want to use a 375 on this scenario. Although, as we saw earlier, we did pass that other one at Snodland. One of the other things I know about the Medway Valley Line is that whilst it is primarily a passenger route, you do occasionally get freight services, especially since there's that connection to Tunbridge West Yard. And speaking of freight, I think this is Ellington that we're currently passing. And in the sidings here is a Class 59 in what looks like unbranded Foster Yeoman colours. This particular version of the 59 does come with the route, and it's the original 59/0. There's a separate add-on where you can get the later 59/2 in DB Schenker colours. I think Dovetail also bundled that with the Medway Valley line, but it is technically a separate add-on. Oh Christ, there's a bloody spider again. I think when you're handling dangerous spiders, you're supposed to use like big, thick gloves, like the sort of thing you use like oven mitts, I think, but it is the last thing I need. Here I can see that the next station is Maidstone Barracks, and why there's this station so close to Maidstone West, I've no idea. Before the other thing I was going to say, alongside the mention of the Class 59, is that the passenger services on this line, they're usually just, I suppose you could say, shuttles between. All of them cover the section from Strood to Maidstone West, and most of them continue on to Tunbridge, with a couple of them terminating at Paddock Wood. And then I believe the morning and evening peak, Southeastern run additional services between Maidstone West and Strood. Presumably, I mean, I think this northern half is like the busiest part of the route. Certainly, once you get south of Maidstone West, it does feel a lot quieter, or like a lot more of a rural environment. And this line that's above the Medway is, I forget exactly where it goes to, but down that way is Maidstone East Station, and I did put a train there, and it's still here. This is a pair of Class 377s in Southeastern colours, so those are ex-Thameslink units, and they got replaced by the 700s. Apologies for that awkward silence, I was just trying to see if I could see what that bloody spider is. Now I think we've got another, basically another 24 minutes before we finish this run. And yes, I don't know what I think. Oh, as soon as this is done, I'll try to get rid of that spider. Bloody typical that this has happened. This has happened while I'm recording a video. 'Cause normally it wouldn't be such a big problem. Anyway, the next stop is Maidstone West, which, as far as I know, is meant to be like is a major station on the route, and basically is the only major station on the route, because all the others are small, basically small countryside stations, especially down at like Wateringbury. And I find it interesting how the peak time 395 services only go as far south as here, and I'm not sure why they don't continue all the way to Tunbridge. Although I suppose that would be somewhat pointless, because Tunbridge is already reasonably well served. Because obviously you've got the fast services from Charing Cross to Hastings, which are run with 375 stroke 6, 7, and 8 and 9 units. And then you've also got Charing Cross to Tunbridge Wells local trains, which are run with 465s. Then I think also at Tunbridge you've got the southern service that goes to and from Red Hill. It's like one of the shorter and more basic services that Southern operate. Although I'd say the most basic Southern service is probably Brighton to Seaford. And in the case of South Eastern, I reckon their most basic service will probably be like Grove Park to Bromley North, if anyone knows about that strange little branch line. And that's a route where they do primarily use 466s. If anything more than 2 coaches would probably be overkill for the Bromley North branch. Right, and I'd actually forgotten that I'd set it up to have like a 3-minute wait here. Mind you, that's what the timetable showed on real-time trains. And I have a feeling it'll probably end up passing, this time will pass by sooner than I realise. I think I'll use this opportunity to have some water. If this was TSW, and I was using the 465/9, or any unit or locomotive for that matter, if you stopped at a station for a long period of time, you could just nip outside and have a butcher's around the platform. Can't really do that here, or in the older train simulator. This is curious. Considering this is meant to be an evening peak service, I would have thought that there'd be a lot more passengers walking around on the platform. And yeah, that's one thing I've noticed about Train Simulator throughout the years, is that the environments through which you're driving, or the environments that are on these routes, they're just not realistically like lively or busy, or however you're supposed to put it. I don't really remember. And it was a problem that carried over into TSW for a while, but Dovetail have since learnt their mistake, and now a lot of the more recent TSW routes are a lot busier in terms of how many people you see on the platforms. Alright, so hang about. So there's that 6 and 8 car stop marker. I mean, the 6 will be for the 395, but I can't imagine you'd ever get any 8 car 375 consists stopping here. As far as I could tell, just then, the platform doesn't appear to be long enough for 12 coaches. As indeed, when we saw that 395 earlier, that was just one unit. Incidentally, I've never been on a 395 in real life, so I don't know how well they stack up when they're running like really busy peak time services. Although I would have thought that, well, if you were working in London and wanted to get and like lived in like the Medway towns, which I'm just trying to think which would be the fastest route, either going from St Pancras down HS1 and then onto the North Kent line in a class 395, or to come down from Victoria via the conventional third rail lines in either a 375 or a 465. I mean, sometimes, for all I know, Southeastern might even use 377 or 707 to do like a local from Victoria to Gillingham. Speaking of the class 707, I'm thinking I'll try to record another video with that train today, and that'll probably be a run from like London, Victoria to Orpington, but I haven't really decided exactly what I'm going to do with the 707 yet. Just have to see how things go and whether or not my mindset changes. Actually, that'd be a good idea to get a shot of a screenshot of the 465 on super elevation, or preferably without the cell phone tower in the background. Because I remember I got this sort of shot once when I was driving, well, recently when I was driving the bullied Pacific number 21C123 Blackwall Vale on the Western Line to Scotland, and I used that as the thumbnail for the video, the relatively short video I made about bullied locomotives, although that just featured the light Pacifics and the Q1, because I know that you can get the Merchant Navy class, or from Bossman Games, but I honestly don't have enough interest in the Merchant Navies to want to buy that add-on, especially since from what I gather, Bossman Games' stuff is incredibly advanced, too much, and it is too much so for me to just get my head around. Although, if I was to ever get a Bossman Games product, it would probably be the LMS Stanya Mogul. And this is East Farley, which, like Aylesford, has got staggered platforms. It's strange, a slight bug with the door chime. What does that say? Just East Farley. On the signal box, it also says East Farley. Aside from the whites, this colour scheme sort of reminds me of either Oakhampton or there was another southern region station. I suppose Brading on the Isle of Wight. Because I remember that Brading Station was restored to, I forget when it happened, but it was restored to its original Southern Railway condition and done up in the those old colours. Well, I say original condition, but the railways in the Isle of Wight were around long before 1923. Pretty sure I once saw a photograph from real life of a 466 departing East Farley that was taken from that footbridge. Although that looks like the same asset that I saw at was it New Hythe? I can't remember. And the next stop, despite its silly name, is actually one of my favourites on the line, that being Wateringbury. And from memory, that's another station with staggered platforms, and it is right next to the river, so you can get some decent shots of trains in the same frame as boats. Of course, you can also do that in loads of other places throughout the UK, like in, I guess, Kingswear, in Devon, for example. That being the terminus of the, what is it, the Dartmouth Steam Railway? Where it's a heritage line over the southern leg of an old Great Western branch line. What's curious is that the mainline trains run by the modern Great Western Railway TOC, they run as far as, they leave the main line at Newton Abbot and then they terminate at Paignton. And that always fascinates me because Paignton is not physically a terminus station. Indeed, the trains have to, the mainline trains have to go forward. The mainline trains have to go forward, have to go further to, I think, the Godrington sidings and then reverse there, come back in on the other platform. Then, of course, you've got the third platform off to the side, which is for the steam locomotives and obviously older diesels like the Class 25. And then of course the line, despite the fact that Paignton is the terminus for the mainline services most of the time, the route the line does physically continue past the station and on towards Kingswear. And indeed, there are sometimes mainline excursions that go all the way to Kingswear. One of them, I think, was the Torbay Express, which was, I think that was an excursion that would leave from Bristol Temple Meads and then go down through, like, presumably the loop to round to Weston-super-Mare and then through Taunton and Exeter, and of course along the Dawlish Sea Wall, and then they'd end up in Kingswear. I think in the past they used engines like Great Western King number 6024 King Edward I and Bullied Pacific number 34067 Tangmere on that sort of run. And you'd certainly want a large and powerful steam locomotive, or any locomotive, for that sort of run, especially since once you get past Newton Abbot, that's when the line starts running through very hilly terrain, and you can get gradients as steep as like 1 in 66, especially on that section south of Paignton. Anyway, it looks like I'm just looking at the bottom of the HUD, and it looks like the platform at Wateringbury is rather short. And I don't remember if the 465s have got selective door opening or not. If anything, they're probably too old for that sort of feature. Although, I think only about 6 years after the 465s came along, the London Underground introduced the 1995 stock for the Northern Line, and those units do have selective door opening. And I think that's because of a lasting relic of the fact that the Northern Line today is just a stitched up collection of routes that were built by a lot of them were built by different companies, and that means not all platforms on the line are long enough for, I think it's 6 coaches. It's kind of like with the Class 700s on Thameslink. There's another signal box in what looks like vintage Southern Railway condition. This one more so than back at East Farley. Incidentally, I wonder if there's a West Farley. I mean, if there is, I don't know of it. This building here, this looks like an old goods shed. And yeah, it's not often you actually see what appear to be custom assets on a DTG route. But yeah, that's what the signal box and station building look like. They're definitely not default assets that I've seen before on other routes. Nottingham Victoria much. If you remember that strange steam era Nottingham route that Dovetail made, you'd be forgiven for thinking the detail on that route is so basic that you'd be forgiven for thinking it was brought out in like 2011 or 2012. But in fact, it was either 2017 or 2018 when it was released. And yeah, it has not aged well. I was right about the boats being next to the railway. Although these are obviously like old canal narrow boats. Incidentally, they remind me of a certain episode of Last of the Summer Wine, specifically one from season 5 called the Flag and Further Snags. Anyway, now that we've left Wateringbury, we've only got, I think, 3 more stations, including Paddock Wood. I remember, I forget how long ago it was, but it might have been before April last year. I did record a video where I drove, I think it was the Class 416 2 EPB from Paddock Wood to Maidstone West. And I remember I quite enjoyed that run, even though it was somewhat awkward staying at the stations for upwards of about 30 seconds and not really doing anything. Especially since the 416 is rather quiet when it's not moving. A there's a lot of good screenshot opportunities on this route. Even though in this case you've got the blasted what looks like a cell phone tower in the way. It's either that or something to do with GSMR, like the modern era radio system that the UK trains use. Although to me it looks like this cab model for the 465 doesn't seem to have been, or doesn't appear to have like any kind of GSMR like keypad in it. I don't know what this is supposed to be, but that doesn't look like GSMR. It looks like the older cab secure radio technology. I think Armstrong Powerhouse managed to get or simulate that on the class, I think it was the 205, the Southern Region diesel electric multiple units. Well, I suppose the class 205s would be better known as a thumper. In other words, that strange orange machine who, through his misadventures, let an unrealistically round boulder loose on the narrow gauge Skarloey Railway. I wasn't expecting a speed limit as low as 30 miles an hour, but oh well, might be to do with the crossing. At least I think that's a crossing just there past the platform. And here we are at Yolding, which sounds like someone wanted to say yodeling, but for some reason they couldn't get the spelling right. There's those default, like, Coogee Rail Simulator era construction sounds. I think even though I didn't point it out earlier, I think I heard them at Maidstone Barracks. It's like there's a lot of those really, really old routes from this game, like, well, what's an example? I suppose the old Portsmouth Direct line, Somerset and Dorset, perhaps, where you would hear those horrible default construction sounds. Don't think you really hear them that often on modern era routes. Anyway, just wait for the guard to do that bell thing, and now we're off. I'm actually quite surprised that there's this many whistle boards on this line. I mean, I wouldn't have thought that there'd be that many because I'm not used to Southern Region third rail routes where you have level crossings, because especially in the London area you basically don't have any level crossings, not counting foot crossings, mind. So I think there's that one reasonably well-known foot crossing on the freight-only branch line that serves Angerstein Wharf, and I think there was also one out west, like on a freight-only branch off of Southall, and there's also quite a few foot crossings on the line between Romford and Upminster, and even though that's run by the London Overground, I'm pretty sure that's not technically in London, but rather actually in the county of Essex. There's another small siding, although I'm not sure what that would be used for. Alright, I think I'll be a bit cautious this time with the stop at Beltring. It's a nice looking bridge, reasonably well modelled as well. It seems that spider hasn't reappeared yet. I think I'll have to go and get some help to deal with that thing. Can't imagine that. Sounds like someone's using a hose. So I forgot you could get that horrible screech when you initially switch it on. Anyway, this looks like another one of those stations that's got really short platforms. If anything, it looks like it's too short for a 4-car consist. I suppose we'll have to see if we can get the whole train in the platform. Right, I think that's it. Oh, although only for some reason the doors on this last coach didn't open. I've just realised I haven't looked at the passenger view at all. Looks very similar, if not the same as, or very similar to, if not the same as the old passenger view from the really old Southeastern Class 465 add-on that would have been released back in RS, or the days when Dovetail Games called themselves RSC. And I remember that old 465, the pre-AP Enhancement Pack version, was very, very basic and not very well modelled, and didn't have very accurate details, but I remember I quite enjoyed driving it despite its shortcomings, if that's the right word. And that was with the old Armstrong Powerhouse Class 365, 465 and 466 Metcam sound pack, because that was made back when you didn't have these BREL/ABB built units in the game, because these weren't brought into the game until the original Chatham mainline was released. And from what I can tell, it looks like this model from the AP pack, the front end, to me, it definitely looks a lot better than in terms of its proportions than the default Chatham mainline version. And I find it quite interesting that Armstrong Powerhouse used the cab model from the Class 365 for this thing. And speaking of which, I do also have the Class 365 Enhancement Pack, but I've never really been able to use it. Although, theoretically, you could... I just had an idea of possibly... If I remember, I'll try to look up some to see if there's any photographs of Class 365s in Hastings, and then see if I could, and then possibly make a scenario where you take some iconic Southeastern era 365s on a run from Tunbridge to Hastings. Although I don't know where I think when 365s used to run on third rail lines, I think they only went to Dover or Ramsgate. I could be completely wrong, but obviously you mainly, for most modern image stuff, you've got First Capital Connect and Great Northern and ScotRail. But the other day I tried making a scenario on the East Coast Mainline London to Peterborough route, and aside from the fact that it crashed as soon as I tried putting down a Class 180 at Potter's Bar, that route is just so outdated, and the track layout on the East Coast Main Line out of King's Cross has been so heavily modified since the mid-2010s that it's nigh on impossible to make a decent modern era scenario on that route. You know, with the class, using the LNER Class 800 and 801s, and Hull Trains 802s and Lumo 803s. And of course, now with the 700s and the 387s and what have you. Oh, and the 717s. Whilst I've got all that, and the 91s and Mark IVs. Whilst I've got all of that lot, it is still rather annoying. And I do wish that Dovetail or some freeware person at least would or could bring out a far more up-to-date version of London to Peterborough that didn't crash. And now we're arriving at Paddock Wood. We can see some more 375s. And these ones are going to Ashford by the looks of it. Incidentally, a while ago when I made that updated British Rail video about British Rail Mark II coaches in New Zealand, I filmed the intro scene in Train Simulator and here at Paddock Wood. And I think this platform where the 375s are departing from now, that was where I put a Class 33 and some Mark II coaches, and then I had a Gatwick Express Class 73 with Mark II's coming by on the fast line, heading back towards Tunbridge. Not realistic at all, but I just, for some reason, I've just decided to use Paddock Wood as the set for that scene. The rest of the video is just using real footage that I'd captured. And at last, we have finally made it to Paddock Wood, and I'm quite happy to have finished this run, considering how many issues I had with the lag before I managed to get this recording done. And yeah, I think now that we're at the end, I'd like to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, well, what is technically my first look at the AP Enhancement Pack for the Class 465. And yeah, I invite you to potentially check out some of my other videos, and if you like them, you're welcome to subscribe. I'm not going to tell you to. And not really a lot else I can say now, so yeah, just take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Now I've got to go and try and deal with that spider.